Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Our lab today I will talk about formations of the الهارت tube and الهارت loop. First slide in the chick embryo, 33 hours. In this slide show the gas relations forming الectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm. All forming is called the trilaminar germ disc. Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. In the same slide, more interiorly, here in these sections show gas relations is beginning. The neural plate is folded. This is called a neural fold. A neural fold surrounded this neural groove. This cavity is called a neural groove. And ventral to the neural fold, a notochord. This is the notochord. Also in these sections show the mesoderm is divided in three parts. The part surrounded the neural fold and notochord is called the paraxial mesoderm. The paraxial mesoderm forming the somite. The middle part of the mesoderm, the intermediate mesoderm, later forming the kidney systems. And the third part of the mesoderm, a lateral plate of the mesoderm. A lateral plate of the mesoderm divided by a small cavity. This cavity is called the intra-embryonic cavity. The layers of the lateral plate of the mesoderm, two layers of the lateral plate of the mesoderm. The layer adjacent to the ectoderm is called the somatic or parietal lateral plate of the mesoderm. And a layer adjacent to the endoderm is called the visceral or splenic lateral plate of the mesoderm. And this cavity is called the intraembryonic cavity. Divided the lateral plate of the mesoderm in two layers. This is the parietal lateral plate of the mesoderm adjacent to the ectoderm, while the layers adjacent to the endoderm is called the visceral layers of the mesoderm. In the same slide, more interiorly, you can see the neural fold close to forming the neural tube. This is the neural tube. Ventral in neural tube, the notochord. This is the notochord. In these sections show the paraxial mesoderm more compact and more differentiated, forming the somite. And somite containing to the central cavity. This cavity is called the somatocele. إذا من أشر لك هنا راح تقول لي ما راح تقول لي paraxial mesoderm، وإنما هنا صارت أكثر more compact and more differentiated، تقول لي somite with somatocele. Also in these sections you can see a second part of the mesoderm, the intermediate mesoderm, later forming the kidney, and a third part of the mesoderm, the lateral plate of the mesoderm, lateral plate of the mesoderm divided by the intraembryonic cavity into two layers. Layers adjacent to the ectoderm is called the parietal lateral plate of the mesoderm, while layers adjacent endoderm is called the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. Also in these sections you can see these vessels. These vessels is called the dorsal aorta. A dorsal aorta derived from the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. Vesicular systems derived from the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. More interiorly in the same slide, in these sections, the embryo is folded, lateral folded. You can see a neural tube, ventral to it, notochord, and this is the paraaxial mesoderm surrounded the neural tube and notochord. المور lateral paraaxial mesoderm intermediate mesoderm، والمور lateral intermediate mesoderm lateral plate of the mesoderm. Lateral plate of the mesoderm divided by the intraembryonic cavity. This is the intraembryonic cavity divided the lateral plate of the mesoderm two layers. Layers adjacent to the ectoderm is called the parietal or somatic lateral plate of the mesoderm, while the layers adjacent endoderm is called the splanchnic or visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. And this is the dorsal aorta. You can see dorsal aorta. In these sections you can see folded in that side and in that side. That's the lateral folded. Lateral folded form the gut tube. This is the gut tube representing by the pharynx. This is the wing of the pharynx. Gut tube opening is connecting with iliac sac cavity. This is the iliac sac cavity. Iliac sac cavity form a roof of the gut tube after lateral folded. Also in these sections show anteriorly and posteriorly fold. Posteriorly and anteriorly fold. In these sections show part of the neck regions of the C shape of the embryo. You can see this is the two limb of the heart, a U shape of the heart tube. You can see this is the limb of the U shape, and this is the another limb of the U shape. The limb of the U shape of the heart tube later fused, forming the single heart tube after lateral folded. إذا هنا راح يتمثل لي الانteriorly fold representing by a limb of the U shape of the heart tube, while the posteriorly fold representing by a neural tube ventral to it notochord and with a dorsal aorta. Anteriorly fold representing by two limb of the U shape of the heart tube. A two limb of the U shape of the heart tube derived from the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. Similar arrangement of the dorsal aorta. A dorsal aorta derived from the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm, and a two limb of the heart tube derived from the visceral layer or visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. But a two limb of the heart tube show in the anteriorly part of the C shape of the embryo. Okay, but a dorsal aorta show in the trunk of the embryo. A two limb of the heart tube after a lateral folded form a single heart tube. You can see in the next slide. More interiorly in the same slide, you can see more development. This is the neural tube ventral to it notochord, and this is the paraaxial mesoderm on the side of the neural tube and notochord. More lateral paraaxial mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm later forming kidney systems, and more lateral intermediate mesoderm, the lateral plate of the mesoderm. Lateral plate of the mesoderm divided by intraembryonic cavity. This is the intraembryonic cavity. Divided the lateral plate of the mesoderm into two layers. Layers adjacent to the ectoderm is called the parietal layers. This is the ectoderms, and this is the parietal layers of the mesoderm, while layers adjacent to the endoderm is called the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm, and this is the dorsal aorta. And when the complete lateral fold forming the gut tube, here in this sections the gut tube representing by the pharynx. This is the wing of the pharynx. After complete of the lateral plate, a two limb of the U shape of the heart tube fused and forming the single heart tube. You can see this is the single heart tubes. A single heart tubes consists of the three layers. Inner layers, endothelial layers, is called endocardium. Lateral, it's that the cardiac jelly. Cardiac jelly full with hyaluronic acid disappear later on, and the outer layers of the single heart tubes is called epimyocardium mantle. You can see this is the epimyocardial mantle. You can see the epimyocardial mantles continuous with the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm, because is the derived from the visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm. Epimyocardium composed of the myocardium and epicardium. A single heart tube suspended by mesentery. This mesentery is called the الميزوكارديوم. إذا أنا من أشر لك هنا هذا إيش راح تقول لي؟ dorsal الميزوكارديوم. A single heart tube suspended by the dorsal الميزوكارديوم. Again, neural tube, notochord, paraxon mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm, parietal lateral plate of the mesoderm, ectoderm, visceral lateral plate of the mesoderm, dorsal aorta, bilateral dorsal aorta, pharynx, and this is the single heart tube, consists of the three layers: endocardium, cardiac jelly, and epimyocardium, a single heart tube suspended by a dorsal mesocardium. And this is the intraembryonic cavity. A second slide, 20 hours whole mount of the chick embryo, not sectioning. And this slide show the U shape of the heart tube. Here in this slide show this is the neural fold. بعد ما صار بها close حتى يعطينا neural tube. Only neural fold. The floor of the neural fold, this is the neural groove. And light staining here you can see representing by a notochord. This is the notochord, and this structures is the U shape of the heart tube. And more caudally you can see this is the neural plate and the somite. Again, this is the neural fold, neural groove, and notochord. U shape of the heart tube, more caudally neural plate, and this is the somite. Next slide, this slide 33 hours, also a whole mount of the chick embryo. In this slide you can see more development when the heart a two limb of the heart tube fused forming a single heart tube. This is the single heart tubes forming from the anteriorly to the posteriorly by the bulbous cordus, ventricle, atrium, and sinus venosus. This is the two horns of the sinus venosus. Okay, this is the heart tube, and this is the two horns of the sinus venosus. Here you can see this is the brain vesicles, and the opening of the neural tube anteriorly is called the anteriorly neuropore. Anteriorly neuropore. You can see هنا هذه المنطقة اللي هي تكون opening، هذه نسميها بالanteriorly neuropore. And this is the telencephalon, diencephalon, and you can see this is the optic vesicles from the diencephalon and mesencephalon, rhombencephalic isthmus, metencephalon, and this is the neuromeres of the myelencephalon. Neuromeres, and this is the heart tube forming from the anteriorly to the posteriorly by the bulbous cordus, ventricle, atrium, and two horns of the sinus venosus. And this is the notochord. And this is the somite. Caudal, you can see this is the primitive streak, and the anteriorly end of the primitive streak, this is the primitive pit, and a dark region surrounded to the primitive pit is called the primitive knot. Primitive streak, anteriorly a primitive pit surrounded by a primitive knot, and this is the somite, and this is the two horns of the sinus venosus, and this is the heart tube. And next slide, 72 hours, also the whole mount in the cheek embryo. In this slide show more development of the heart tube. You can see this is the heart tube, and also in this sections show the brain vesicles, telencephalon, diencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalic isthmus, metencephalon, and myelencephalon. From diencephalon, you can see this is the optic cup and lens vesicle. And this is the otic vesicles or otocyst or ear vesicles. Also in this slide show this is the pharyngeal arch, the segment of the pharyngeal arch, and stomach. And this is the heart tube. Thank you.